it's conservative.
If you're looking for something liberal
and realistic, this is the place to be.
Welcome back to another segment of our podcast without a name, or do we call it a podcast that is yet to be named? My name is Makosi, and we're back again with the second part of a second part, discussing prosperity in a family context. With me is my sister Diana. A running joke that I'm always the little brother in every episode that I do here. So my sister Diana and the flaming arrow, the Mrs. Nomam Sasio. Thank you for being here, guys.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
Right, so we're going to go straight into it and continue with the conversation from the previous episode. I'm going to ask, so you mentioned in the episode that your in-laws are very focused on building generational wealth and building up the family so that you're not reliant on any one person. Now, I don't know whether these are trade secrets or not. So is there anything you can share? With me personally, I don't know about anyone else watching. With me personally, what have you learned? Then the second part of my question is there anything that you've learned there that you're going to go and apply to your people, so to speak, the Ngubes, something that you can go and teach them from what you've learned to be able to build up that part of your clan?
Yeah, there's definitely many lessons that I've learned, and I think one of them I'm already implementing, like the importance of a family trust.
Yeah.
Being structural, knowing the right legal entities to use to help you build that wealth, right? And it's something that we never spoke about as a family. And even so, now, it's from a divorce perspective, having that conversation has become more important in bringing back my own parents, my own step-parents into the conversation to say, we don't see where the line starts and where it stops.
Yeah.
So the conversation has to include everybody.
All right.
And when it's including everybody, how much are we all willing to participate to that goal and look at ourselves as a family? Because the two people out of everyone else come from one section and the other two come from one section, the other one. You know what I mean? So because of that and the principle of that family is family, I don't look at I will call them half-brothers as anything less than my sibling with the one that I share complete DNA with. How do we build for all of us, And having those kind of conversations showed me how people who are brought to a table for a specific mission lay down any other, what is it called? Other ulterior interests, all in the name of building. And I think that's something that I learned very much from my in-laws, right?
Okay.
Is that you build from a place of you're teaming up. It's a purpose-driven team up and go forth with that direction. And that's something that I've appreciated learning from them and implementing it from my family side. And with its own complexities, it's pretty much worked out very well. It's a slow journey, but then I'm appreciative of it.
Okay.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Sorry, I would want to digress a little bit, maybe possibly out of your field, but we're talking of prosperity within a family setup. What I would want to hear from you is, what is your definition as an individual of prosperity?
Okay, so actually, believe it or not, right? When I was early in my 20s, we had this political party that was called Viva Zimbabwe. Our agenda was prosperity for everyone, right? And we had to try and dig deep to say, what is that prosperity? And my definition came to the point of being able to meet my personal needs, my financial needs, my spiritual needs, and my physical needs without having to take away from somebody else.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Quite interesting. Makosi, it takes me back to the previous conversation that we had with Mr. Vute, you remember?
Yeah.
When I think at the end of the conversation, our conclusion was that prosperity is wholesome.
Yeah.
We're not looking at, in as much as we're looking at the financial aspect of prosperity today, and we're delving deep into that conversation in terms of a family, but we're looking at being prosperous in all aspects of your life. And then, so how then do you apply this to a family setup? No, before I even get to a family setup, I'm not looking at you, your husband, and your kids, but let's look at you and your husband. As an individual, you are saying you're looking at being prosperous in terms of your finances, in terms of your social status, in terms of physically, are you fit, are you healthy? We're talking of mental status and everything. But when you're looking at you and your husband, are you guys in sync? Are you at the same level in terms of your definition of prosperity?
I think so. I think so, because his definition of prosperity is to show up in his best self, whatever that he is doing. He's prosperous in that manner. Where we become in sync is that I do not stand in his way to show up in his best self, right? So the morning that he has to show up and go to work and meet the team, I am not the person that woke up in the morning and was kicking up a fuss that he goes to work downtrodden because there was something that I have taken away from his personality, from his prosperity. Yes. In the same light that my prosperity definition is that I should prosper without taking away from somebody. So that's where we sync up. That I don't do something to take away from him. At the same time, I don't show up to be a distraction in what he's going to show up for. That's
right.
how we
so, a follow-up question to that. How do you think you and Kuda managed to get to a point where you were speaking the same language? Because you were socialized very differently. Beginning at a cultural level, Kuda is very Shona, you're very Ndebele. You needed to meet at that level first, and then still be able to find each other and have unity of purpose. What was your experience in trying to get to that point?
I think it was having the difficult conversations, right? They were very robust. So I think Tanaka said in the previous episode that we didn't ask each other what's your favorite color because that could change, right? So the conversations were always very deep and intentional, sometimes too methodological that you'd go on Pinterest and like 10 questions to ask someone that you want to marry. But that was a trigger point because having those conversations led us to that space. Not only that, I think we pretty much had our relationship so much in the public eye that we now held ourselves to a certain standard of accountability because there were people that were watching us, right? At the beginning of our relationship, we used to have this Facebook show that was called Sleeping with the Enemy, right? And it delved into trying to investigate Gugura Hundi from the perspective of a Shona person that did not experience it and not only did not have influence in it, and also a Ndebele person that has grown up in a space where it's not direct culturalization that you dislike a Shona person or you think that they must be held accountable for something, and then trying to find how do we understand each other coming from that perspective, right? So those kind of conversations were pretty difficult, but there were also ones where we started the conversation because we want to get on the other side with a resolution, number one, of how are we proceeding in our own marriage. Number two, helping give you my perspective such that even if it's not something that you agree with, you are sensitive enough going forward when it comes to those specific issues. None of us experienced Kugraundi, but then we had people that were affected by it greatly, right? His grandmother was very much in Ndebele. She comes from my village, believe it or not, right? Wow. So that dynamic in itself was that the family had some elements of being Ndebele, and if mother tongue was anything, you'd expect that they all spoke that language, but then that was a different case. So those kind of things were the difficult conversations that we had. You know, what were my expectations going into a marriage? What did I expect from a husband to have before I walk in? And if it wasn't there, was it a deal breaker, or was I patient enough to wait for it to happen? You know what I mean? So those conversations were very candid. They were difficult, but then the point was that we're coming out of it together and not calling it quits. So it was easier to,
So what I'm getting from you is the most important thing, or the basis of any relationship, shall we say, is communication. And when you communicate, you need to get to the bottom, the most important aspects of the relationship. That's what I'm getting from you.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah.
So before Makosi decides he's going to pick so and so or whoever, the most difficult conversation is what's important. Mm-hmm. It's not where you taking that girl. It's not what is she doing at the moment, but it's the most difficult conversation. Because I'm trying to picture, I don't know about the viewers, but I'm trying to picture a situation where I am sitting with you, my Ndebele brother, and we're talking about Kukraundi.
Yeah.
And then you have my Sekuru, and then you have your Sekurus, and they are listening into this conversation. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned that you're pretty close to your young brother, right? And possibly close to your other relatives. Mm-hmm. So they are watching this show, and they are listening. They're going to come back to you and say something, possibly try and derail. I'm trying to picture. I'm trying to picture.
Well, the difficult conversations that were happening in public were also not done without honor and respect. You know what I mean? Like that was not a lost principle in those conversations. Yes, they were difficult, but then they were done with, I don't think at any point when I was speaking, I dishonored the person that I was speaking to or the people that he represents. Even when he was speaking to me, he did not dishonor me as a person and the people that I represent. What it did was bring up perspectives that even my dad sometimes says, I was watching your show again the other day and I never looked at it in that perspective. You know what I mean? It's just an appreciation because the people who are already in that conversation are not volatile and going in other places. But also, even in some difficult conversations, right? I mentioned my husband is a divorcee. I'm brought up from a home of divorce, right? Sometimes I get into a conversation as a child of divorce and not talking about marriage, right?
Yes.
And he has to try and fetch me out of that and say, I hear you and where you're coming from, but I don't want you to, what is it called? Project, right?
Yes.
And I should be okay with being called out for projecting something. In the same light, when he's speaking, I should never see him as, oh, my father did that or my mother did that. And I should appreciate, and also if he's projecting it back on me, be able to say, okay, that's a projection, which we accept, but can we go back to the core issues? That allows you to just hold the other person with tenderness, if I could say.
Did you go for training for this?
No,
because
actually.
I'm trying to imagine. I don't know about you, Makosi.
No, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, this sounds like these people went to a lot of therapy to get to that mature place. Yeah.
I mean, we I guess we took ourselves through marriage counseling.
Yeah.
Also based on our previous experiences.
Okay.
But we also allowed ourselves to be in a space where you can still be hurt here because it's safe. No one is going to judge you for feeling hurt.
Yeah.
No one is going to tell you, get over it. Be comfortable in that space. But in our whole courtship time, the most mundane conversations we had were about politics. Even that was too close to our hearts that it didn't sound so mundane. Right, but then I would guess those were what was outside of us and what we were building. Yes. So that would be you're having a slice of cake at Sopranos and talking about, ZANU-PF for MDC, that, and then we have a different perspective about it. That's as far as it went. But we are not different from the fact that there was a change that we were working towards. Whether at a national level or at a personal level, it was still a change. And how would we define that change for ourselves? And driving towards those conversations made hanging out even much more fun. I looked forward to hanging out with him because at least there was that intellectual and emotional conversations that stimulated me.
Okay. I'm just trying to think. I'm sure he can resonate when you're talking of having a logical conversation, right? As girls, come on, we're emotional beings, right? How did you manage to get to that point where you can actually have a conversation and I don't want to say draw out that femininity out of you, but how do you get to that point where you can actually have a logical conversation? I'll still go back to the Gukrawundi. I'm trying to imagine. Well, I'm speaking from a viewpoint of I grew up with my grandmother, my great grandmother from my mother's side. She was Ndebele, right? And she was married to a Shona. The Shona marriage came out of the Gukrawundi business, you know. So it was not a subject that you could talk freely. And if you did, it sparked a lot of emotions within the home.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think, you sat and you had a logical conversation. And it went well.
I have to give that to my debate training. I did a lot of debate, not only in high school, but in university. Throughout university, I did debate. And the skill was to always have the most uncomfortable conversations and have them in a manner that you are going to be heard with such clarity that you win. I did mention in the previous episode that I'm competitive. Yeah. So having to teach myself to not let my emotions come in front of what I'm trying to say, because emotions will always block out the other person hearing you. You know what I mean? Right. So it was a practice from a sport that I enjoyed doing. So coming into marriage and putting that into principle and into the work, it came to my advantage. If I say that it was something that we figured out together, I'll be lying.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you've got my head spinning a little bit, right? After you've crossed the hurdles of being able to communicate, right, and get each other on the same playing field, how do you manage to align your goals as well, right? You guys own a business together, right? And from conversations you and I have had in the past, you know, when people think fresh in a box, they think Kuda, and that's because he was at the forefront when you first started, and those roles have changed. You've had to step up as he pursues other things. You've had to step in and be the face of the business as well.
Yeah.
How do you guys get into a space where, all right, as people, we're aligned now. How do we then align the goals, or how do you create the goals for the family? Because you're not creating goals for yourselves, only creating goals for your kids as well. How do you get into that space?
I think that the whole who's now the face of the company happened with a tragedy. I think it's one of the biggest hurtful things that we've had to experience. My husband almost died of COVID, and during the time when we was in hospital, our business failed to, keep up the momentum. Yeah. Because all I knew was the operational side of the business.
Farming. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I didn't have a problem with executing,
yeah,
right? But then selling is not about just making the product.
Yeah.
It's about making your customer want to have your product, which is something that is Kuda's specialty and strength, right? And so aligning that goal that thankfully, he didn't pass away from it, and he had to come out and say, okay, we need to now reframe how we work at it. It meant that he had to teach me a skill that he had, and I had to teach him the operational skill, right? So the goal became, how do we do a skills exchange? When do I allow you to be sensei and I'm student? And when do you allow me to be sensei and you're student? So that conversation was a very intentional one, because the data could speak for itself that, because of what was happening, we've got this metric that what was happening at the time for our sales to be high or low, right? 2018, when we had the 1:1 gauge situation happening, there was a certain thing happening with our with our
business,
sales,
yeah.
right? The moment that the rate started shifting, we could see that our sales were going down. What did we do as well to change that dynamic? So we always map out. If you walk into our war room at the office,
Yeah.
right, there's a certain map out of what was happening in the country, what was happening in our home.
Yeah.
There were times when we are at conflict at home,
Yeah.
and you can tell that
The
you know
business is
the
suffering.
business is suffering,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You go and put it there because it happened, and you accept that it happened, and you're not only reflecting, you're reflecting from a position that we came out of that.
Yeah.
We succeeded out of that, so we have that trail path, and then looking at it and saying, okay, COVID hit us so bad, we needed to change our business strategy. You know,
Yeah.
we needed to change how the story comes out.
Yeah.
But then the fundamental story was that we're still building a family business, and we're still building it together. You
Yeah.
know, didn't change. So it was just a shift of a game plan more than the game in itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know the both of you are very data driven.
Yeah.
Do you apply that as well to your home life? Do you sit and say, right, this month, the
Costs went.
ABC costs went up, and sit down and have that discussion with your kids as well. Say, guys, we used X amount more electricity this month, to get everyone on the same page.
Well, no, not with our kids because they're still young.
Yeah.
And then the older kids, we don't live with them. So that dynamic hasn't really kicked in. And I think because we've been only married for 5 years,
Yeah.
believe it or not, it's been such a short time that we are still also learning how to work with ourselves. So that conversation of how do our costs look, or how many times did we, hit red in terms of our tempers,
Yeah.
how do I become a better wife in the following month
Yeah.
is based on the previous experiences. We have those conversations,
All right.
we have them. Again, I guess it's a culture because we've always had the difficult conversations. I don't know if we can actually have lighthearted conversations, except maybe if we're watching Netflix or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, it's just been a culture from the time we were courting into the marriage. So we have those conversations about what are we doing differently, what were we frivolous on, and how does it impact us going forward? What do we need to change? Okay, so maybe it's time we change our wardrobe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We've done very well.
Yeah.
Let's buy more clothes and stuff like that. It's like that. But then Kuda is not a person that puts value into money. I'm very different. That's also about our upbringing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So the money conversations usually come from me.
Yeah.
And he has to calm that storm of, it's not as bad as you're making it look, right? Or sometimes I'm like, oh, it is bad. And so
Yeah.
that I can defend my bad situation,
Yeah.
the data has to be upfront, say, yo, highlighters, pink, neon,
Yeah.
orange, look at it, you know what I mean? And then he can also accept and say, oh, okay, I'm willing to. It's always a give and take negotiation type of situation.
I think the last question from me is, you're not an island, so you've got friends around you, and I'm sure you've heard experiences from other people where they don't want to have those difficult conversations. And I think after this conversation, well, personally, I was already getting into a space where I wanted to have difficult conversations with people.
Yeah.
Where do we get it wrong in going into these difficult conversations?
If I say that there's a method to it, I will be lying.
There's no method to the
I don't
madness.
think there's a method to it. There's a selected method for you two madmen. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Right.
For your own mad people,
Yeah.
you choose your own method. At least if you can agree that there's a door right through that wall when there's no door, and then you all run smashing into
Yeah.
it. It's common purpose. You can create the door by running and smashing
Yeah.
into it. It may not work for the next couple. My friends some don't have that kind of dynamic in their relationships. Some
Yeah.
have got his money, my money, his people, my people.
Yeah.
It's worked for them, it hasn't worked for them. But I try not to have a God complex about the fact that my marriage works in this way, and I think that it's working, so you should also do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty much our perspective.
Oh, okay, quite interesting. Personally listening to you, I was actually going to try and adopt what you guys have have been doing? Because to me, it sounds like it's working and it's got to work. Because personally, I've tried so what's your favorite color? What movies do you like? And at the end of the day, relationships have gone on and crumbled at the end of the day, possibly because of the lack of the difficult conversation. Yeah. So personally, I would say my take home from what you have just given us is teamwork. And secondly, have those difficult conversations, be able to have those difficult conversations. And to my female counterparts, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to do this. We need to have logical conversations, right?
No, actually, you know what? People are emotional beings, right?
Yes.
We're spiritual beings having a human experience, right? So you be angry,
Yes.
right? Choose how to express your anger.
Yeah.
Right.
Be sad. Choose how to express your sadness. Be happy. Choose how to express your happiness. Like, you don't avoid the emotions because you want to have the conversation.
Okay.
When you spoke to me and said 1, 2, 3 things, they hurt me. I don't know if you noticed that they did, but I'm coming to you with the fact that it hurt me.
It hurt, yes.
It did not only make me feel hurt, it made me feel angry, right? But blowing up and shouting at the top of your voice, I don't know if there's ever a time that you can bomb the UN and then come and say, well, want to discuss world peace. you can't discuss world peace after bombing the one place that peace can be discussed, right? So feeling the emotions is not divorced from the logic.
Okay.
I am hurt, that's why I'm coming to have this conversation. Believe it or not, sometimes when the emotion overclouds me, I don't have the conversation, I go and have it in my journal. Because I have to box myself in, do I even understand what I'm going through, or do I understand what I'm trying to say? Okay. And half the time if I'm writing it and it's not making sense, then maybe I need to go back and look at what is making me be so upset.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm so happy and I want to celebrate, why is it that I don't want to celebrate with my husband? Which is highly unlikely, right?
Yeah.
If I find myself in that position, again to the journal,
Yeah.
something is now misaligning. Why wouldn't I want to celebrate with my person? Because of the joys that we celebrate and of the sad parts that we go through them together. Okay. So in all of that, if it's no longer with my partner, something fell off, and if it fell off a long time ago.
Yes.
And you now have to either go back and pick it up, or you now decide that you're not doing it anymore. Unfortunately for me, marriage is forever. So we have this joke that one of us has got to die. You know what I mean? That's the only way.
Like
but
that.
you know, so if one of us has to die, none of us is willing to kill the other. We're gonna go through it together.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
All right. Any closing remarks, Diana?
Closing remarks. Like I said, hard conversations.
Yes.
That's one thing I'm taking home. And secondly, teamwork. Whatever I am planning to do, if I cannot find somebody who's willing to team up with me, then we're not going anywhere. Teamwork. And lastly, prosperity is not about one aspect of life.
Yeah.
It's a wholesome aspect. We're looking at am I healthy, mentally, physically. We're looking at socially, right? We're looking at a lot of things financially. Are we in a good space, you know? So for me, that's my take home for this. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad that.
Right, the flaming arrow. Any final words?
Marriage is not easy, but marriage is also fun. If you ever think of marriage, don't always think about the hard parts, because then you never explore the good parts of marriage. Yeah. Family is there to support your marriage, but also boundaries are important, that you establish them before joining yourself with somebody. Always put your best intentions forward, and let your partner trust that whatever you're doing, wherever you are doing it because you love them, you respect them, you honor them, and you want to uplift them. If those are the things that you have to do every day in marriage, so far so good. If it's not good, I'm hoping I'm going to come back and say, on that one. But so far so good, based on those principles.
All right. Ladies, thank you very much. If there's anyone watching from home, I guess, who wants to hear my opinions, they can hit my DM. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Noma. We hope to have you again. Hopefully next time talking about the business so we can push your business. All right, everyone watching at home, thank you very much for joining us and have a good week. We hope to have you again